What if mathematics isn't just theory? What if it's a decision making tool? In the last episode on our series, How to Think Like a Mathematician, we saw that life is all about bringing out balance. It's not just about looking for more, but it's about getting the right things in the right proportion. On this episode on our series, we are going to be looking at a key concept. And before we get started, I would like you to list 3 things you did yesterday that actually stressed you out the most. That's the 3 things that stressed you out the most yesterday. Think about it and write it down. Call that list 1. And then on list 2, I would like you to bring out 3 things you did yesterday that actually brought in money or peace or brought in more progress or growth into your life yesterday. Call this list 2. Now do a comparison of list 1 and list 2. I can bet you that if you do a comparison of list 1 and list 2, in most cases, in most people, these 2 lists are almost never the same. So what point are we trying to make? Most times we spend our energy on one list, meanwhile our future depends on the other. On this episode of How to Think Like a Mathematician, we are going to be looking at an important rule, a rule that is going to change the way you allocate your time. You may be spending 80% of your time on the things that barely matter. And if this rule is true in your life, then working harder is not your problem. The real problem is you are working on the wrong things. You are using most of your time on the things that do not really matter most. And this is not just theory. It is not just theoretical. It is a proven rule. Let's demonstrate this on the board. So today we are looking at the 80-20 rule, which stipulates that 80% of our results are produced by 20% of our input. Now let's consider the life of a student. So we are going to look at how this student studies, the different methods the student uses to study. That's his input, the time he uses, and the knowledge he retains. Now the first studying method is by highlighting textbooks, and he spends 50% of his time highlighting textbooks. At the end of the day, the useful knowledge retained is just 5%. Now the second studying method is by studying key concepts deeply, and he uses just 20% of his time to study key concepts deeply. Ironically, this 20% produces 75% retention of knowledge, and then he uses 30% of his time memorizing everything, and that memorization accounts for just 20% of the knowledge he retains. This student may be putting in much time studying, but just 20% of the time he puts in produces most of the result he's having. So the encouragement to this student will be to put in more time on what is producing the most result. Just imagine what will happen if this student comes across this rule one day and decides to put in rather 50% of his time in studying key concepts. Imagine what will happen to his results. That's the point behind the 80-20 rule. What we have just demonstrated is known as the Pareto Principle, and it's not just a theory. It is observable everywhere. So stop trying to do everything better. Instead, find out the 20% of your activities that produce the greatest results in your life. To do this, you need to ask yourself the following questions. 1. Which 20% of your habit is contributing to 80% of your growth? 2. Which 20% of your products, if you are a business person, is accounting for 80% of your total sales. 3. Which 20% of your activities is bringing about 80% of your income. Do you know the sad reality? Most people know about the 20% input that brings about the 80% of their result, but they do not consciously do something about it. They don't act on it. That's the sad part. Why? The reason is that sometimes it involves cutting away the 80% that is producing just 20% of their results. And doing this, cutting away this, most often feels like failure. It feels like giving up. And so most times it feels wrong to cut it off. That feeling may be right or it may be wrong, but it is a decision worth putting on the table and examining. Because what if focus isn't failure? What if focus is strategy? The question I constantly ask myself at Kameh Inspires is that which of my products move the most volume? Which customers spend the most consistently on my products? Which of my marketing channels actually drive real sales? These questions help me to stop trying to sell everything to everyone, and it helps me to double down on what works and stop bleeding out energy into what doesn't work. It is true, sometimes it feels like abandonment, but it is actually strategic focus. Now let's take this example for a content creator. You are a content creator. You post on 5 different platforms, but you get 80% of your engagement on one. But you spend equal time on all 5 platforms. That's not balanced. That's scattered effort. For the average person watching me now, let me guess how you save. It's just a guess. You have small money here in your Momo, small money there in the bank, small money in a Jangi group, and small money under the bed, maybe for just in case. And you feel safe because your money is in many places. Maybe you are busy protecting 100,000 francs in 5 different places. Meanwhile, 80% of your wealth growth could come from putting it together in one place that actually works. You already know which one works. Maybe it's the land that you could buy. Maybe it's the business that you could invest in. Maybe it's that account that you could save in. The thing is, you are just afraid to take the risk. The question for you today is, what should I stop doing today? Which habit should I stop doing today? The 80-20% rule is a core principle in stewardship. God has not given you unlimited time, neither has He given you unlimited energy, no unlimited attention. God has given us specific gifts, specific resources, and specific seasons. And so the question is not how do I use everything equally. The question is rather, how do I steward what matters most? You are 20% that produces the 80% of your results. May be your assignment. You should treat it as such. Here's what I've noticed. Most people understand the 80-20 principle, whether consciously or unconsciously, but they don't implement it. They don't consciously sit on it and use it to form a strategy. Why? Because it requires saying no. It requires cutting. It requires admitting that what you thought mattered actually doesn't. And that's uncomfortable. But this series in Kameh Inspires is built on a different idea. What if mathematics isn't just theory? What if it's a decision making tool? In the next lesson, we are taking the concepts that separate strategic people from busy people, and we are showing you exactly how to identify your 20%, your highest impact activities, your best customers, your most valuable habits. Not just focusing on theory, but actual frameworks you can use directly. If you are ready to stop being busy and start being strategic, hit the subscribe button and turn on notification to get informed on subsequent episodes from this series. And before you leave, ask yourself this question: what's your 20%? What small number of activities, customers, or habits are actually producing 80% of your results? And more importantly, are you giving it your best attention, or are you splitting your attention with the 80% that barely matters? Think about that. Write it down and come back next week when we show you exactly how to build your entire strategy around the 20% that actually matters. Thanks for watching. It's the CEO of Kameh Supplies. We are headed for the top, for the bottom is crowded. See you on the next episode on how to think like a mathematician. Until then, stay blessed.